So I've got a mystery for you. Let me set the scene. It's October 1347, and 12 ships dock in the port of Messina, Sicily, just in from the Black Sea. But these ships are carrying much more than just grain in their cargo. They're carrying ghosts. Most of the sailors are dead or dying and covered in oozing boils. The authorities order the ships back to sea immediately, but it's too late. The killer has already slipped onto solid land. Within days, the plague breaks out in Messina. The illness soon spreads from the port cities into the countryside, from Italy into France, and then soon across the continent. Soon, no one in Europe is safe from the painful pus-filled boils. This isn't a slow-moving epidemic, it's an eruption. And by the time it finally slows down, somewhere around 50 million people in Europe are dead. That's about half the population of the continent wiped out in just 5 years. No matter who you were, from royalty down to the lowliest serf, everyone was vulnerable to the plague's deadly grip. So how did this killer move so fast? And why was the world so helpless to stop it? Well, let's put on our detective's cap, because these are the Outbreak Files. To crack this case, we've got to see the world through the eyes of a 14th century investigator. Back then, nobody understood that disease could be caused by tiny, invisible living creatures. The invention of the microscope was still 250 years away. Germ theory, another 500. To help us shine a light on who the 14th century experts thought was responsible, we're calling in our lead cold case consultant, JOHN ABERTH, who literally wrote the book on the plague. Hey, John.
Hi.
So you've spent your career investigating this. Imagine it's 1348 and people are trying to figure out what's causing the Black Death. Who or what are the suspects back then?
Well, there are a few theories that were bandied about at the time that attempted to explain the Black Death, and I'll break them down for you. In October 1348, the King of France, Philip VI, asked the medical faculty of the University of Paris, one of the leading academic institutions of its day, to give their opinion about what was causing the Black Death. And they came back with a consultation in which they said the plague was caused by a conjunction of the planets Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. They said this conjunction drew up vapors which were ignited and then created these bad vapors or bad air. And when they breathed in this miasma or bad air, it upset the balance of the bodily humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and this caused plague or an illness. Then we have an alternative, and this was the poison theory of Gentile da Feligno, who was a professor and doctor at the University of Perugia in Italy. And he said the plague came from poisonous vapors, that when it entered the body, it was like a foreign substance or a foreign agent that bypassed the humors, and it would multiply and then take over the heart and kill it. This could explain why the Black Death was so indiscriminate, as poison was deadly for everybody. The moral contagion theory was also a very popular theory that was really espoused by the Catholic Church of the Middle Ages. This is a religious explanation that plague came from the will of God, that God was so angry at people's manifold wickedness and sin in the world that he sent down this plague to punish them. An extreme reaction to this was the flagellant movement, where people went around the countryside whipping themselves for 33 and a half days. But then what happened when even the flagellants themselves got the plague? So eventually, by October of 1349, the Pope suppressed the flagellants by papal order. So anyway, that was the end of the flagellant movement.
And there's one more theory, right?
The poison wells theory, yeah. This is the last theory we'll talk about. Humans were deliberately poisoning wells in order to give the plague to other people. And it chiefly blamed the Jews for poisoning these wells in order to give the plague to Christians. It is estimated that, at least 400 pogroms occurred It is thought that thousands of Jews died in these pogroms during the Middle Ages, during the Black Death, and that indicates that people were really terrified about this plague and were willing to kill anything that they believed was the cause of this plague.
Thanks a lot for that breakdown, John. As an investigator looking back at this case through a modern lens, this is where the sheer terror of the outbreak really turned into madness. These pogroms were horrific. In Strasbourg alone, 2,000 Jewish people were burned alive in a single day, all based on rumors before the plague had even reached the city gates. The plague arrived anyway just a few months later. It's a brutal reminder that in a global panic, scapegoating and misinformation can be just as lethal as the disease itself. But looking at the board, John gave us 5 wildly different leads. As chaotic as this all looks, there is a pattern here. So most of these theories were guesses based out of fear or of ancient tradition. Gentile de Foligno's idea that the plague was a physical thing, passed from person to person, was the closest the medieval world ever got to the truth. But without a microscope, he was staring at a killer he just couldn't see. In 1894, a Swiss-French bacteriologist named Alexander Yersin finally solved the mystery. A single-celled bacterium called Yersinia pestis was the culprit. Modern scientists found its fingerprints centuries later by extracting DNA from plague pits in places like Kazakhstan, London, and France. Bacteria don't have wings. They can't travel from the Black Sea to Italy all on their own. To infect millions of people, it needed billions of accomplices. It needed the fleas. Ugh. Yersinia pestis is a true villain. It hides inside a flea's gut and multiplies until it creates a blockage, effectively starving the insect. This turns the flea into a hyper-aggressive and effectively poisoned biological syringe. When a starving flea bites a human, it regurgitates that bacteria directly into the bite wound. But if the flea is the needle, it still needs a way to get to its victim. So this is where the investigation usually hits a wall. For a long time, the explanation was simple. Fleas live on rats, rats travel on ships, and then the rats spread the plague. But there's a problem with that explanation. You see, rats are territorial. They die in their nests. They don't usually travel across continents, especially not at the speed that the Black Death moved. So, scientists looked for a different getaway car. Some pointed to human fleas and lice, but there's a major biological flaw to that theory. To infect a flea, the host animal it's biting needs a massive amount of bacteria in their blood. Humans rarely reach that level. Only about 10 to 18% of victims develop enough bacteria to pass it back to a flea. But rats and mice are like little biological factories. They develop bacteria levels in the billions, making them the perfect source to keep a plague of fleas poisoned and ready to bite. So humans can't carry it, and rats generally prefer to stay closer to home. So there's still one more piece of the puzzle that's missing. The grain trade. This is the missing link that brings all the pieces of this mystery together. So rats' favorite food is grain. And here's the kicker. Fleas can survive in grain dust, even without a mammalian host. Because 14th century Italy was suffering from a massive famine, they were desperately importing grain from the Black Sea. The very ships meant to save Europe from starvation were actually transporting millions of stowaway fleas and rats hidden in their food supply. The grain didn't just move the rats, it moved the entire ecosystem of the plague across the world, right to Europe's doorstep, and it set this whole entire deadly story in motion. Our first case is technically closed, but Yersinia pestis isn't actually gone. The bacterium has remained in the soil, and for years, a deadly epidemic sprang up every decade or so, somewhere in the world. And even today, smaller outbreaks are known. The bacterium hasn't changed, but luckily the world around it has. Antibiotics can clear a plague infection in days. Sanitation in many parts of the world dismantled the rat-dense conditions that gave it a foothold in cities. And surveillance systems catch outbreaks before they spread too far. For example, in 2017, Madagascar saw an outbreak that infected over 2,000 people. 209 people died, but modern medicine and surveillance ultimately contained the outbreak. So, we didn't out-evolve the plague, we outmaneuvered it. But outmaneuvering one killer doesn't mean that the streets are safe. In our next case, we're headed to Victorian London for the ultimate medical mystery, where a simple map and a missing pump handle would change the world of public health forever. So hit that follow button so you don't miss it.